Hello and welcome to the Tried It podcast, your proven pathway to a better copywriting business. I am Sarah.
Hi there, and I'm Nicole.
And we are two copywriters on a mission to learn more about the art of copywriting and marketing and actually doing something with the information that we learn. It's revolutionary. So on this episode, we are discussing Donald Miller's StoryBrand book, which is available to you for you to buy. We highly recommend buying it. And we discussed our experiences of reading the book in the previous episode. So if you haven't listened to that one already, I would recommend going back and listening to that because it'll give you a lot of context for the discussion that we're going to have today. But we both read it, we talked about it, and we decided the three things that we learned that we're going to implement in our own businesses or in our clients' businesses or our client work. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So perhaps you would like to start, Nicole. Remind us what you learned from the book, what your commitments were, and tell us how it all went for you.
Sure. So I want to just reiterate what Sarah said, that everything we say is definitely not a replacement for buying the book. We highly recommend you read it for yourself, not only to support the author, but also because we really feel that everybody can get like something unique from these books. You know what I mean? Like if you listen to mine and Sarah's discussions, you'll see that we both took different things, which I actually find fascinating. You know, we both take different things out of the stories, which brings me back to what I learned. And he talks a lot about, you know, how to build a story and the narrative elements that make a good story, and how every story needs to follow this particular pattern where you have, I guess, a hero and something happens. And we speak about this in detail. And he talks about how every piece of marketing collateral, whether it's a newsletter or an email or a blog post or a website even, needs to have this particular structure. It's quite an involved structure and quite an involved pattern. And I think it's quite complicated, actually. Yes. I don't think it's simple or as formulaic as, 1 + 1 = 2. That it isn't. And it's also a lot more complicated than if you're familiar with the hero's journey, which is like a very famous narrative arc. It's a lot more involved. I feel like it starts there as the building block, where the hero and something happens and they go off and then they meet somebody and then they help them overcome this problem, and then they overcome the problem and then they come back changed. Like that's a very basic version of a hero's journey. This is a lot more involved. What I took it gave me food for thought in terms of how stories are built, especially as a copywriter in the clean tech space, where I guess clients have a unique story to tell, and there is this pain point in how we're going to tell the story. My 3 implementation things were I wanted to apply it to a link to some of my LinkedIn posts. I wanted to apply it to a client post. I also wanted to try and use it for my upcoming website copy. And then the other thing which I threw out there, which I think was a bit ambitious, was I wanted to use this to try and build my own narrative arc for the clean tech space. But I'm not going to go into detail about this now because I want to pass the mic over to Sarah. And I would love to hear, Sarah, I'd love to hear, what you got out of it. I'm very curious to hear. And I'm also curious to hear, just remind us, what you said you would work on.
Okay. Well, I'm really interested to hear your implementation points. We haven't discussed this before recording, so we're kind of going into this fresh with our reactions to each other's findings. Before recording, I went back and listened to our previous episode, the book discussion. And that combined with my experiences of implementing gave me a different perspective. And my perspective on it is, which I'll discuss, and then I'll move on to my implementation points. I think I worked out exactly who this book is for, and it's not for us. But I feel like I worked out who Donald Miller's perfect StoryBrand guide is.
This is fascinating. This is fascinating.
I think that it's the ideal audience for this book is somebody who runs their own business, who's been doing it for a little while now. Let's say, a couple of years, and you're having a certain degree of success in terms of income, in terms of clients, and now with that success behind you, you perhaps have got a bit of money, resources to spend on marketing, but you don't know what to do. And you don't really know anything about marketing copy. If this is the situation that you find yourself in, I would highly recommend StoryBrand as a kind of plug and play formula for marketing a business for the first time. A business that, let's say, it's something like, I'm kind of pulling things off the top of my head here, but maybe you're like a home cleaning agency or a small property management agency, and you know what you bring to your customers. You're really like nailed down on the service element of the business, but you're not sure how to talk about that to other people and how to reassure them that you're the perfect person to do this. So I would say, and it has to be a business that's kind of simple in its concept, like that, like, a home cleaning agency or something. And in that case, I think that StoryBrand is a really good option for you. And even then, you might find yourself clearing out some of the paraphernalia, like the call to action, the villains, but it'll give you a great structure to have in your mind as you go about marketing your business. And I say all of this because if you're a copywriter working on different kinds of businesses, different kinds of industries, as you and I found, Nicole, there are problems with the StoryBrand framework, that it's both very simplistic and very complicated at the same time. And I don't think that it's appropriate for every single kind of business, whereas Donna Miller tells you all the way through that it's this universal mechanism that's just going to solve all of your problems.
Right.
So, so I would say if you have this kind of business that I've been describing, use StoryBrand. Or if you're a copywriter who works with these kind of businesses, maybe you're a copywriter whose niche is actually a geographical niche, that you provide copywriting and generic marketing services to small businesses like this who are getting ready to outsource their marketing. You could rinse and repeat the StoryBrand formula. You don't have to explain the whole thing to every single client. You can use it as a way to nail down the fundamentals of marketing these kinds of businesses. So that was my revelation about the book. It's not designed for us.
That's fascinating. Like, it's also because Donald Miller in the book, bless his soul and his little heart, he's very big on, if you do not follow this formula, your story will fail. Like, this is one of his things, right? He says that like, I'm being a bit dramatic. He says that stories that don't work don't follow this formula. That's what he says.
Yeah. And you'll get eaten up by another business who does.
Right. Okay, that's fascinating.
Yeah, I don't know. Do you agree with me? Do you think that that's a pretty accurate summation, or have I just pulled that out of my arse?
No, listen, whilst I was trying to implement, I tried to apply it to my work, and I did apply it to some things, but I found it very difficult. And I think that there are other copywriting formulas and things that are more effective. So a part of me does agree with you. I really like the way you put it, and I really like the framing that it's for a specific kind of business with a specific kind of problem. And I agree with you. I think for other copywriters, it might be a bit heavy, and it might also not apply, as you said.
Yeah.
But I'd love to hear, like, what just if you can remind us about your implementation points.
Definitely, yes. So my 3 implementation goals after having read StoryBrand were, number 1, to create a one-liner. This is something that he talks about at the end of the book. And the one-liner is something that you say as the business owner, and if you're in the position of having employees, they also say. And it's a way of not summarizing everything that you do, but kind of setting the scene of roughly what the business does. And the whole purpose of it is to write or to phrase the one-liner in such a way that you say it in this succinct way and that people say essentially, wow, tell me more. And I did feel the need of having a one-liner because my copywriting business, I know I can get lost in the weeds when I'm describing it, which isn't good. You need to be able to describe the services that you do and how they help people. And also I was attending a conference, the London podcast show. And in these conferences, you walk around, you meet people ask you what you do. If you can't explain what you do briefly, you're boring people, you're losing them. And Nicole, you recommended Donald Miller's video on YouTube, which we're going to link in the show notes here, which is, it's about half an hour long, maybe a bit longer than that. And it's an in-depth look at creating a business one-liner, which I found to be a really good complement to reading the StoryBrand book. My experiences of it is that he gives you a kind of formula for your business one-liner. And it starts with a little bit of scene setting of sort of like most other businesses being sort of your competitors, most X don't do Y. I do Y because Z. And Z is helping, how it helps people, how it offers the transformation. My immediate thought on this was that kind of formulation of most X don't do Y is the kind of thing that you could use if you already have the permission to speak. For example, if you're getting up on stage, or perhaps if you're on a podcast or something, it's a really interesting way of opening. But if you're in the kind of scenario that I was in, where you're essentially trying to speak to as many people as possible, and maybe it's somebody that you're standing next to in the queue for the toilets, or you're sitting next to each other waiting for a timed session to start, and you just want to have that kind of quick connection,
right?
Starting out with a line of, so what do I do? Most X don't do Y, but it's honestly, I'm going to swear, I think it makes you sound like a dick.
Completely agree.
If somebody did that to me, I would have to hold my eyes open to stop the eye roll. So I think it's a bad way to introduce yourself in those kinds of networking settings. So I ditched it, and I went for another formula that I worked on with you, Nicole. And my business one-liner is, my name is Sarah. I help podcasters turn their audience into a community and drive sales through their podcast by repurposing their old episodes into super shareable and useful emails and lead magnets.
Amazing.
So it's still quite long, but I think it really hammers home the benefits, the community element. Podcasters tend to like their audience to be a community and drive sales through their podcast. You're monetizing the thing that you do. And I describe how I do that. And there's a little bit of intrigue in the, shareable, useful emails, lead magnets. That's the intrigue. Right. And hopefully that sets up the response that comes along the lines of, tell me more.
How, if I may interrupt you, sorry,
yeah.
If I may just interrupt you for a second, I'm just very curious. How did you find people responded to this? Did you find the response was good?
I would say that one thing that Donald Miller really has right is that when you have your one-liner, you really, really need to practice saying it so many times, and not practice it with people you don't know. Practice it with your friends, with your family, in the shower, because I found I hadn't practiced it enough. And sometimes I would slightly lose my way or feel an element of doubt while saying it. And I think if you practice it so much that it's automatic, that stops the doubt. That stops the, oh, am I boring this person? So if this is you, if you're preparing for some kind of networking event, practice your one-liner, nail the formula of the one-liner and practice it. So all of that to say that when I was saying it to people and I was confident about it, I generally got a pretty good response with, oh, that sounds like something I need for my podcast, which is exactly what you want to hear. Or, oh, I'd love to have something like that. I don't have the time. And in that case, you're already paving the way for quite a useful discussion. But I didn't deliver it confidently 100% of the time, which is kind of on me.
But it sounds like an amazing starting off point. It really does. And it sounds like you've nailed the formula,
I think so. I would say that it is a really useful business tool, and probably the most useful thing I got out of StoryBrand just conceptually. And perhaps this could be an exercise for the newsletter where we do a sort of one-liners for different settings. A one-liner where it's Donald Miller's, where you kind of already have permission, where you already have the floor, and a one-liner that's a kind of bouncy, quick way of introducing yourself to somebody when you want to catch their attention, but also not be too demanding. So that was my feedback on that, and I will carry on practicing it.
And your other implementation tips or other implementation commitments?
So yeah, that was my implementation goal number 1. I did implement. Implementation goal number 2 was to analyze the homepage of my website using the StoryBrand framework. This was a good exercise in that I wrote my homepage copy, as I mentioned in the last episode. I wrote it quite a while back, and it is quite useful. It is useful to go back and revise these things from time to time. So I went and did that the other day. I made changes to my homepage in that I edited out some of the copy that I think is not as important, or that I felt that I could explain more succinctly. But I don't think that a homepage, this is where I disagree with Miller, I don't think a homepage is a great place, certainly not for the entire framework. A homepage really just needs to kind of give people the basics about what you do and then push them in the direction of taking an action. And maybe sometimes it takes quite a lot of copy to do that, but I don't think that it needs this entire, hero, guide, plan, call to action, problems, villain, vision of failure, vision of success. So I didn't implement a lot on that. I did try to lean into the pain side a little bit more, lean into the villain, tap into the problems. And that's something that I'm going to continue doing in other elements of my marketing. But I personally found for my own business, the StoryBrand framework is not something that works on my homepage.
Fair enough. And based on, the analysis that you did you make any changes to the copy? I know you said that there was some maybe emphasizing the pain points. Did you make any changes or not really?
I did make changes, highly noticeable to me, microscopic to others. So I've included I dialed in a little bit more on the vision of success, which is kind of the opposite of what I said I was going to do, because I said I was going to lead into the pain side a bit more. But I realized, actually my vision of success here could do with a bit of sharpening up. I feel like I'm still working on the pain side of the marketing, and maybe that's a kind of recurring theme. So in a word, yes, I made some changes, but I wouldn't call it revolutionary. I would call it a good exercise in having a suite of your website copy, which is something that you should do from time to time.
I agree. Would you recommend this to, I know you had this brilliant point at the beginning about how this is not really suitable for copywriters, but would you recommend this for copywriters, as a tool or as a framework for reviewing their copy?
I would recommend it in that it gives a structure. And if you're writing a piece where you feel like you're losing it halfway through, or you're not clear where you're going, I think that the StoryBrand framework offers a good, like I said, a good structure. I would say it's more useful in other kinds of content marketing that's not really copy, not website copy, not necessarily sales copy. If someone else has a different experience, and if this is a framework that you use all the time when writing, for example, a sales page, I would love to hear from you, and I would defer to your experience because that's not my area of expertise. But my take on it is that it's really useful for things like blogs, emails, perhaps social media in certain elements of social media, but not for not for websites, not for things where you're like, oh, I've really got to close a sale here.
So I can talk to this a bit, not as an expert on this formula, but one of my, sorry to like take away from you, but I'll just say this quickly because it's on your point. One of my implementation goals was, to start working on my website copy for my clean tech website. And I haven't finished it yet, but I started thinking about how I would apply this framework to what I want to say. And I really, really struggled. Like I really struggled to kind of put in all the kind of elements together. Whereas I did actually successfully manage to apply it to, it was an email that I wrote for a clean tech company. Like it was part of a campaign that we wrote. And I used it, and I will say something that it helped focus my thinking. And more than that, it helped focus my thinking in terms of like the pain point of the person I'm writing to, which is very obvious. And it's very like copywriting 101. But thinking in terms of this framework did help. To say that I would use this every time going forward, no, I don't think so, because it's not how I write. But what it did do was it forced me, when I write, I usually just like start writing, which is probably awful. The fact that I was trying to fit into a framework forced me to like stop and think about how all the elements work together, which was very refreshing. But as you said, I would also love to hear like if any listeners use this formula. If you are somebody who's been certified, because I know you can get certified through this framework. If you've been certified and you have, you don't agree with us, we would love to hear from you. Really, like we really are open to hearing your feedback. But Sarah, sorry, I want to hear about your story.
Yes, I'd forgotten that you could get certified in it. So if there are qualified Millerites out there, come in and smack us down. So my last implementation goal was to write content based on the StoryBrand framework. And I wrote a blog post and a LinkedIn post. I'll talk about the blog post first. It's live on my website now. The subject line is from podcast to profit, how to convert your listeners into clients. This is where I found the StoryBrand framework to be quite effective in writing, because I wrote it by first thinking about the StoryBrand framework and then plotting my ideal clients against the framework. My ideal clients being podcasters who have both a podcast and a business that they run alongside it, and that they want to use the podcast as a marketing tool for their business. And perhaps it's not been as effective as they wanted it to be, but they're trying to run a sales launch through the podcast, and they don't really know how to do that. So in this instance, I found Donald Miller's framework to be quite helpful, because I could identify, obviously the hero being the podcaster, me as the guide with this plan that I was offering them, and their external problem of their podcast being kind of a drain of their time and energy, their internal problem of maybe my podcast isn't very good, things like that, this kind of self-doubt. And also the philosophical problem of these kinds of people that I'm targeting are usually they're sort of coaches. and they want to bring about some kind of transformation in their own clients. And in that sense, there's a sort of philosophical stepping forward into your, self-actualized identity. So, and the call to action being, if you're launching soon, you need to get this done. And the thing that I was pushing was help turn your podcast episodes into a lead magnet that will get your clients onto your email list. And when they're on your email list, you can sell them the service that you're launching. So I think that the StoryBrand framework gave clarity to this blog post. So it helped me to plot it out a little bit better, and it perhaps gave me a bit more confidence digging into both the vision of failure, the vision of success, more so than I would have done otherwise. So if this is something that you that you do for yourself or for your clients, I would recommend using the StoryBrand framework, particularly in blog posts that are essentially, this was quite salesy. This wasn't exactly a sales page, but it was a salesy blog post. And I posted about it on LinkedIn and got a pretty good response. So I was quite happy with that. And I also wrote a story-ish post on LinkedIn that you saw, Nicole, which was about me rescuing a bird.
Which I loved the post.
It was, well, actually, I say you saw it, Nicole. You helped me write it. This one, I suppose it wasn't the StoryBrand framework as such. It was just a way of talking about my work through a different lens, with that lens being a kind of narrative. I found it fun to write. I've seen other copywriters use this kind of formula where they talk about something that's happened to them that's seemingly unrelated, and then you make a segue into a sale. It's a technique that I have slightly mixed feelings about, because I think it really depends on what the story is. And this is all highly subjective. So from my opinion, me saving a bird was fairly newsworthy. To give context to everybody, I was in my apartment, and this bird that looked like some kind of parakeet just flew into my apartment in the middle of my workday, and I was like, oh, I guess I have to save a bird now. I've got other shit to do today, but I'm suddenly somehow morally responsible for this bird. And this for me is quite unusual. This doesn't happen all the time. And I posted on Facebook about it, trying to find the owner. Long story short, the bird was an Australian rosella. The people on Facebook told me it was a nice bird. It shat all over my apartment. And the real owner has been found. Bird and owner are reunited and live happily together once again.
What a happy ending. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's like,
yeah. So I quite liked the story, but I've seen other people use the same technique for things like that I would consider to be a bit trite. Like, oh, I really wanted a peanut butter and jam sandwich, and I went to the supermarket and they were all out of peanut butter, and this really got me thinking about, and that for me is too much of an extension of this technique. It's not interesting as a story, whereas the bird story, I feel like you get mileage out of it either way, because it's just by its own nature an unusual event.
So I love what you shared about the bird. I love the story. I love the post, and I think you bring up like a brilliant point about LinkedIn specifically. Is this? It's like a warping, which I know is probably not really a word, but like it's a warping of this technique that I see a lot of. Like, there's a tree outside the house, and the tree made me think of like how seasons and things change in life, and this is linked to my business. Like it's very trite, it's very forced, it doesn't work. But at the same time, which is something that Almana brings up in the book, people love stories. So I always try, not always very successfully, I always try to write story driven, because I love stories, and I think it does work. And that's also, I think, one of the things that drew me to this book. Is like I was actually hoping to kind of like perfect my ability to tell stories from this book, which I don't think I did. But I agree with you. I think it needs to be done sparingly. I think it needs to be done properly. And perhaps this formula could help one think about how to do that. Like, I think you did it well. It wasn't a very forced segue or twist or whatever you want to call it. But I think it can go very pear-shaped. And what do you think? Do you think that this is a good formula for perfecting telling stories on LinkedIn?
Well, I would say that I forgot to add that this post, judging by the standard of how my posts normally perform, this post performed really well for me. It got easily over 1,000 impressions. It was like 1,300. It got 35 interactions, loads of comments.
That's amazing.
And I think that part of the success of that is that it's not a technique that I do all the time. Whereas if this is the only way that you know how to write, and I'm on some people's emails list, and this is the only way that they know how to write with these stories, using it too much takes away the value of it, especially if the story-like event that you're describing is just not that interesting.
Right.
So I would say it's a technique that can perform really well for you, especially as, you know, Nicole, you and I exist in this space where we see this kind of marketing quite a lot. But some of the people who liked and commented from on the post are friends of mine that work in entirely different industries, and they don't see anything like this. They some of them message me privately to be like, "Oh, that's a great post." Whereas I think if you're in the copywriting space, okay, it's a good post, but it's not dazzling in its originality. So I would say have it as a tool in the toolkit, and the StoryBrand book could help you perhaps hone those abilities, but don't be a one-trick pony with it.
Very, very well put. Yeah, that's very, very well put.
Thank you. So that was my 3 implementation points: the one-liner, the homepage analysis, LinkedIn posts, and blog posts. So now I'd like to hear yours, Nicole, and I'd like to hear how you got on.
Okay, so I won't talk you through the goals again because I spoke about them. I'll talk about like what I did with them.
Yeah.
So I reluctantly tried to apply this to one of my LinkedIn posts. It did okay. I must be honest, like I struggled to apply it. I don't know if it's because of how I write or how I think. And the post, I'm trying to think what it was about. When I can look it up, but the post did okay. Like, it didn't do amazingly well. I think I kind of got lost in the story a bit, which is also the problem, and it comes back to what you said. Where I did have success, as I mentioned, was applying it to a client's campaign email. Like, it was the 3rd email in a campaign that they were sending, and it was very complicated, and it's to a very specific audience. And the first 2 didn't work because our messaging was off, and the 3rd one performed better. Like, I can't really share stats, but like, it performed better. And I think one of the things, I don't think it was just this formula, but I think it was taking a step back and taking the time to really consider the pain points and to consider like these kind of elements. To say that I was as structured and as you were, like I loved when you talked through what you did with the blog post. I don't think I did it to that level, and I think maybe if I would have, it would have been better. I find often, because I've been doing this for a while, like I'm stuck in my old ways of doing things. So, which is what I like about our podcast, is that this forces me to stop and think about things in a different way, which is sometimes hard when you're up against a client deadline. But I would recommend to copywriters to try this, because I think my client, I actually used 2 things. I used some of this ability to tell the story, and it helped me to structure it better and helped me to think of the target audience. And actually I implemented something from our next book, which I won't give away.
Ooh.
Yeah, which my client loved, like that they loved.
Exciting preview.
Yeah, exactly. So it's worth sticking around. And then in terms of my other 2 implementation points, So the one was to apply to my website, which I'm still working on. I have a bit of a block when it comes to my own website copy, unfortunately. So that's still a work in progress. And I agree with you. Like, I don't think I'm going to apply it completely. Like, it's very difficult to get my messaging into this formula. I think it's too much, and I think it's actually going to confuse people.
Yeah.
Like, I must be honest, like, I would describe myself as a story-driven copywriter. And I find one of the weaknesses of my writing is that I often get too caught in the story. Like I was telling Sarah before we started recording that yesterday I decided to sit down and start like working on a fiction novel, not related. And I saw it there as well, that I get like lost in the story. Like I get lost in details that are like the linoleum floor and this room. And like, it's just stuff that's not related. And I think that the formula helped me focus. But I found it like complicated and not easy to apply to my work. And my last thing was to try and develop my own formula, which I am also still working on. I think that, though, I'll be honest, like it's something that the clean tech space solely needs. Like I can't speak for other niches because this is what I'm focusing on right now. And I don't say it from a point of being arrogant. Like I am the person to bring the formula that's going to like unlock your revenue and your messaging. And I'm not saying this as a sales pitch. I'm saying it like as a copywriter who sees a pain point. And I see, because of the very unique messaging pain points that the clean tech space has, and their inability to tell a story in a way that like gets people to understand what they're doing and why they should care, I think that this space solely needs a good formula. And I don't think StoryBrand is that.
Do you think that the problem is that the technology needs to be humanized a little bit to get people to understand it, or is it more that I don't know where I'm going with this. What do you think is the key? What's the key pain point that you see in the way that clean tech is currently marketed?
It's that it's not about the tech; it's about the story. Like this is the thing.
Yeah.
You know, like if I take where I spend a lot of time in my writing, it's companies that deal with energy storage and buildings and decarbonizing buildings. Okay. And if you look at how a lot of these companies talk, they talk about, you know, the batteries and what the batteries do and what the technology the batteries are made of and how you can integrate them. And that's very interesting for engineers. That's very interesting for those kind of people. But if you look at a building manager, again, the specific example, they don't actually care. Like they don't necessarily care. They want to know that it's safe. They want to know that it's going to maybe help them reduce carbon. They want to know that it's going to, do you know what I'm saying? So it's a different way of telling the story. And what I see a lot of the time is people get bogged down in the technology, which loses them. So they're losing the story element. And the other thing is that because it's clean tech and because it's very, very serious, like we're dealing with, you know, the world potentially ending, we're dealing with how we're saving the world. Because of that, they speak in a very specific way. Like there isn't room for this kind of like, it shouldn't be fun, but there isn't room for this creative story. Like people, if you look at, if you spend time looking at clean tech websites, they shy away from stories. Unlike sustainability, like e-commerce products, like if you take something like Oatly, they're all about the story. They're all about the story, creative, because it's a consumer product. And
that's interesting. I was thinking that e-commerce is a good thing to learn from, because there are companies that I've never bought their products, but you just know the story by osmosis almost.
Yeah. And like I love their approach. I don't think it would work necessarily for clean tech, again, because you're dealing with huge technology, fears around integrating new technology, making a shift. But when I bring it back to this formula and I think like what drives people in this field, it's often the carrot or the stick kind of thing. Like it's like do you adopt the technology and make the change because you're afraid, or because you're motivated by like wanting to make the world a better place, or like I'm kind of losing myself, sorry, but I think that this is where story can be very effective.
Yes.
And this is why I think the space needs a story formula. So that like I must be honest, like I don't feel I was as structured as you in applying it. And Like maybe as Sarah and I go along in other episodes, maybe I'll report back on other things I'm doing, especially like as it comes to launching my website. Like I want to see like what I end up doing. And I really loved what you said about how you ran through almost like an audit after you've launched a website. Like I really think there's value in that, and like it's something I would want to do, like through the lens of the StoryBrand, to like look at my website once it's up and like go through that again. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that we talked in the previous episode about the making a StoryBrand light version, the diet StoryBrand, and perhaps that's something that you'll end up inadvertently creating by thinking about how to tell stories in the clean tech space. So I think that that's one to watch, and maybe it'll be a good compromise that ends up working for everybody. Because if you're coming, from the point of the perspective of the clean tech engineer, any story is going to be weird because perhaps you're not used to thinking about it in that sense, and so you're adding just like an element of life to it, an element of structure, breathing that into the marketing, without going the full Donald Miller 7-point framework which might be too rigid and just wouldn't work in that space anyway.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
Yes. And I think that those are perhaps some exercises that we will see coming up in the newsletter, the Tried It podcast newsletter, out every Tuesday.
So maybe we should talk a bit about that, because our newsletter is very exciting. It's $97 a month. And it's really, like, I like to think of it like a magical package, but it's not magical. It's very actionable. It's very practical. What you get every Tuesday is this walkthrough with different things. So it includes inspiration. It includes things that we're thinking about, things that we're doing. And as a way of making this really, really valuable for you, we also include a few things that you can try this week to try and potentially land more clients.
Yes.
And grow your business. So we really see this as like I think Sarah in one of our episodes described it, or I don't know, we describe it as like a shot of vitamin C for your copywriting business. Like it's those 13 minutes a week that you can spend on actually growing your business. Not just like another newsletter, not just something that's going to clog up your inbox and you have to like worry about, or like more tasks to do. It's easy wins for your business.
Yes. And I think that the newsletter is it's a sign of your commitment to yourself as a copywriter and to your business, because you're getting these exercises that are going to help you to grow your skills, to raise your profile as a copywriter, and to get the clients that you deserve to have. So by joining the newsletter, you're going to have our thoughts of what we're working on, the things that we've learned from the books that we have read or are currently reading, an exercise that you can work on either on the Tuesday or in your own time. And Nicole and I are available to give you feedback. If you have a question, if you're stuck, you can ping us an email back and one of us will get back to you with our thoughts. And there's advice in there about surviving the turbulent world of being a freelance copywriter,
which we all need right now, I feel.
We all do. So we're drawing this episode to a close, but we're not ending before announcing what the next book is going to be. So perhaps you'd like to do that, Nicole?
Sure. I will, but then I will. So it's called Smart Brevity. It's well, I'm gonna mess up these names. Do you want I like Jim Vanderhay, Mark Allen, and Roy Schwartz. Those are the authors.
Yes.
And Sarah, it was your pick. So I was wondering, maybe you want to tell us like what drew you to this book and why you chose it. And I just will say one thing before you start. Like I've started reading it, I'm almost done. I'm really enjoying it. I think we're going to have a fascinating discussion, but I'd love to hear from you.
So when I was thinking of what book that we could read next, I was thinking about kind of covering a space that we haven't covered yet. So the first two books that we've done, Anne Handley and StoryBrand, have both been very different from each other. And actually, I wanted to go with something completely different, but I think that Smart Brevity is almost, it's not exactly a midpoint in between them, but it has the formula element that we've seen in StoryBrand, but it's also rules around writing that apply to copywriting, to marketing, but also to other kinds of communication. So it's almost as if you put the first two books that we read in a blender and see what kind of smoothie they make. But they, yeah, the authors have a very interesting background. I'm not going to go into detail discussing it too much now, but they're from the news, and you may have noticed that the news has been turbulent and chaotic for the last, I'm going to say, minimum 10 years. And they developed this formula as a way to tell the news better. And I think it'll be interesting to see how it does or doesn't apply to copywriting. So in the next episode, we're going to discuss what we thought of Smart Brevity and the things that we learned from it that we're going to be applying to our own businesses and to our clients, because that's what we do at the Tried It podcast.
And if you're listening along, we would love to hear from you. And we'd love, if you want to recommend our next book, please let us know. We're open to your suggestions, and we really would love to hear from you.
Yes. Yeah. We'd love to hear your thoughts. If you have read any of these books, if you're intending to read them now that you've heard us talking about them. Yeah. And as Nicole said, there's a slot available for books to read in this first season of the Tried It podcast. So maybe that could be your book, your favorite book, or a book that you've bought but not read yet. God, I've got so many books like that. So yeah, drop us a line and let us know. You'll find all of our links in the show notes. All right. So I think that's everything from us. So we are going to wrap up here. So that's bye from me, Sarah. Thanks very much for listening.
And bye from me, Nicole. Thank you so much for joining us. And we'll catch you in the next episode.
See you there. Bye.
Bye.